Abraham, a staunch follower of God, is upon one ordinary day confronted with the voice of God. What he feels forthwith is absolute dread as he hears of the imminent test to his faith, or lack thereof. The ultimatum is clear. He is to sacrifice his son Isaac. The next day at dawn he sets off, kissing his wife goodbye and mounting an ass with his son sat hugging his back. In such a manner he begins the 3-day ascent of Mount Moriah. Upon the mount's peak he prepares for the sacrificial rite, drawing his dagger. Time has come when he must fulfill his divine deed without further ado. And yet, no sooner is he about to bring the dagger down than an angel makes itself manifest, translating to him God's new command. He is no longer to kill his son. A lamb will do. Fetching the animal and accordingly slashing its throat, it's all over. This is the New Testament anecdote of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, called the binding of Isaac. Of course, though spared in the end, what is paramount in this tale is that Abraham was willing to kill his son, whom he loved more than anything else. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher of the 19th century, explores this in his famous book, Fear and Trembling. I will quickly preface that though Kierkegaard wrote this as his other works fully independently, he did use the pseudonym Johannes de Silentio, among others, and urged Prosperity not to attribute a single word to him personally. I do think he did this because a fictional persona allowed him more freedom and allowed for the first-person narrative format to still work. This all considered, I will still refer to Kierkegaard by name when citing his words, for clarity if nothing else. At the start of Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard marvels at the absurdity and hypocrisy of those who preach the story of Abraham without actually understanding it. What if, he wonders, on one holy Sunday, after a vicar gives his speech on Abraham, the next day a man not so different from Abraham came up to him and revealed his filicidal intentions. He too would murder his son, he says, as a sacrifice to God. Wouldn't the vicar suddenly tremble with fear and admonish the man for having such devilish thoughts? It is precisely in this paradox that Kierkegaard, or Johannes de Silentio, finds himself at the start of the book. If the aforementioned man ought to be seen as evil or mad, then Abraham too should by the same standard be remembered not as a saint but a murderer, and perhaps best forgotten. And yet, what Abraham did is truly a testament to his faith, even if absurd. He loved his son the most, but he loved God still more. It is not despite this, but because of it, that finally God grants him his son back by the virtue of the absurd. It is perhaps the kind of ending that should have been granted to the less fortunate Job. Trying to understand Abraham, Kierkegaard provides us with two types of unique individuals, the common man belonging to none. There is the knight of resignation and the knight of faith. The best way to think of these is using the term the author himself often applies, that of a movement. One must first make the movement of resignation before being able to do that of faith. Here is where the famous leap of faith was first introduced. The knight of resignation is capable of renouncing the very things he desires, knowing deep down the impossibility or immorality of ever acquiring such things. Think of a man wishing he could become rich, and indeed even finding himself on the brink of a lucrative deal, and yet he suddenly throws it all away, knowing it would drive him only further from God, and thus he at once renounces his very desire for the wealth, and in this finds the joy of his own empowerment and security. The very things he wished to gain from wealth physically, he now finds in an abstract sort of way via renunciation. But the important distinction is that he still exists in the universal. His act can be understood by many. He is after all not going against his religious doctrine, selflessness and humility. He is in fact further solidifying his standing in the universal. The knight of faith does not gain such privilege. Kierkegaard writes, quote, "Humanly speaking, he is crazy and cannot make himself intelligible to anyone," end quote. And further down he says, quote, "For his life is a book placed under divine attachment and which never becomes public property," end quote. By this he means that, should Abraham ever be confronted, he could not explain to anyone why he ought to sacrifice his son other than by merely saying it is a trial from God. So, misunderstood by everyone, he would set upon a path completely solitary. He is cursed to walk it alone forever. Søren points us towards the famous chapter 14 verse 26 from Luke in the New Testament. Quote, "If any man cometh unto me and hateth not his own father and mother and wife and children, and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. End quote. What demand can be more terrifying? And the writer urges us not to take the easy way out, but to grasp this passage literally. It at once plucks one from the comfortable universal where everything is collectively admired and understood, and puts one in quite a different, dark and untrampled place, a place only few could walk. It is this, precisely, that makes Abraham a knight of faith. Instead of hearkening to God, he could have blamed the voice for his own insanity, or, like many, fallen onto his knees and prayed to God to forgive him. After all, God forgives the honest and the meek. But instead he makes an impossible movement, a leap of faith. Kierkegaard describes this as the suspension of the ethical, which of course is the universal. What more, he gets the very thing he was ready to renounce by virtue of the absurd, that being Isaac, his own son. The leap of faith is such a paradox because in Kierkegaard's interpretation, sin is made when one succumbs to temptation and so deviates from the universal. And yet, Abraham deviates from the universal but does not do it against God's will, but because of it. The individual, in a way, surpasses the absolute universal and yet does not become a sinner but a saint. This is why Abraham is such a paradox that few, and perhaps none, can ever understand. Perhaps it is best illustrated by Kierkegaard himself when he explains, quote, "It is now my intention to draw out from the story of Abraham the dialectical consequences inherent in it, in order to see what a tremendous paradox faith is, a paradox which is capable of transforming a murder into a holy act well-pleasing to God, a paradox which gives Isaac back to Abraham, which no thought can master, because faith begins precisely there where thinking leaves off." End quote. Where does this finally take us, you may ask? Was Abraham a great man? Would we still think so even if he did kill Isaac? What if we only let him off the hook because he was stopped in the last instance, getting the best of the two worlds? He proved his faith in God without actually having to realize the ultimatum. In my opinion, in Abraham we find a sort of sanitized medium, which pleases us because it means we can get the good without the bad. Abraham proves his utter devotion without sacrificing anything dear to him. As mentioned before, Job didn't get off so easy. But of course, Job also was never instructed to do the killing himself of his wife, sons, and daughters. He instead lost everything dear to him and got nothing in return. It's why we still look at Job as not an evil man, but a tragic hero. Like Kierkegaard says, a tragic hero is the knight of resignation by definition, only that he doesn't get anything in return, thus making his fate tragic. But would we still pity or admire Job if he killed his own wife and daughters all because of God and got nothing in return? I don't think so. I think it's the very redemptive quality which actually makes Abraham admired. Abraham we can only admire insofar as we ignore the fact that he was ready to kill his son and instead focus on the good ending, the one that is preached. This is why the vicar admires Abraham from a distance, but stands terrified at the man willing to do the same in front of him. It reintroduces into the story the very kernel of horror we wish to remove. And the tragedy of it all is that it is precisely this horror, this terror, this dread, as Kierkegaard often calls it, that makes Abraham a knight of faith. And it is why we cannot ever really understand him, but only admire from a distance with centuries gone by, in the comfort of our own good conscience.